In now, Rami Khouri. He's a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. Really good to have you back with us, Professor. Benjamin Netanyahu is now delivering his address to the General Assembly, but as our veteran UN correspondent was reporting, we saw this unprecedented walkout of members of the General Assembly. He said he's never seen the General Assembly so empty ahead of a speech by an Israeli leader. How significant is this, according to you, Professor, given that Israel's atrocities in Gaza are now approaching their second anniversary?
Oscar, this is very significant because it's symbolic of the most important trend, I believe, around the entire world, including much of the Western world and the whole of the global South, which is much more dynamic, assertive, and peaceful protests against the policies of the State of Israel and the policies of Western powers, especially the US, Germany, Great Britain, one or two others, who help Israel pursue its genocide against the Palestinians. There's a groundswell of public support manifested in every possible way you can think of: protests, votes at the UN, blocking ports that ship arms to Israel, banning Israeli football and music groups from participating in global events. So this is something that has happened really slowly over the last couple of decades, but in the last year or two has become very, very rapid and much more significant. Even you have maybe up to a quarter of the United States Congress now that will vote for a ban on aid to Israel or arms to Israel to pressure Israel. This is all unprecedented stuff, and it's a reaction directly to the terrible nature of the Israeli genocide and the complicity of Western societies. These people protesting in the streets of New York, most of them are American taxpayers. They don't want their taxes to shred and kill and burn babies in tents in Gaza. And they're taking more and more affirmative action, dynamic action. The problem is none of the actions so far have pushed Western governments to take serious practical measures like arms embargoes or banning Israel or suspending it from the UN or stuff like that. That probably will come soon now, but this is the significance of what you're seeing now.
Yes, and Professor, as you say, there has been a groundswell of public support for the Palestinians in the wake of almost 2 years of an Israeli onslaught. But we are finally seeing a number of world governments and indeed Israel's Western allies taking somewhat symbolic actions, but also tangible actions, because on Thursday we saw Slovenia impose a travel ban on Netanyahu in the first such measure by a European Union member. We also have reports that on his way from Israel to New York, for the first time, apparently Netanyahu's flight avoided most EU airspace because of an arrest warrant that was issued by the International Criminal Court in November last year on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So clearly it's taken almost 2 years and the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians for world governments to take action. But we are seeing some of Israel's Western allies now taking some sort of a stance. It may be too little, too late, but what's your view? Could they be doing more, and what more do they need to be doing?
Well, Oscar, this is how history happens. You know, I'm old enough to remember the protests in the 1960s against the war in Vietnam and the protests for civil rights, full civil rights in the United States. Those kinds of mass public protests took years and years to achieve policy changes by the government. So keep in mind, any protest you see anywhere in the world is not designed just to express a view. It's designed to pressure whoever is in charge of making government policies to make better policies and less criminal policies. That process takes a long time, and it only happens when the politicians, the officials in power, whether they're elected democratically or not, when those politicians feel that the anger of their own citizens is strong enough to threaten their incumbency and maybe throw them out of office peacefully or through an uprising, they will change their policy. So what you're seeing now is the slow, incremental, but steady and meaningful movement by governments and non-government groups, for instance, labor unions in Europe are having a powerful impact on government policies, student groups in the United States. These are all taking actions now that are pressuring slowly their governments. We haven't yet reached the point where the governments are going to do the kind of things they did in the late 80s against South Africa, the apartheid regime. That'll be the key moment when you see governments banning Israel from, say, going to the Olympic Games or playing football with UEFA. These are being discussed now, or the Eurovision Song Contest. These sound like symbolic things, but these cut to the heart of what it means to be an ostracized, criminalized state and society. And this is what the Israelis are very afraid of, and they don't know how to counter it. The only way they respond to these kinds of pressures, and these pressures are increasing, is by increasing their criminal, aggressive, genocidal assault on mostly civilians in Palestine. They're trying to just destroy any possibility of a normal life for Palestinians. Today, they destroyed one of the last functioning medical centers in Gaza, which was treating 1,000 people a day. So this is where we're at now. The pendulum is swinging. And as Martin Luther King said, the arc of history bends towards justice, but it bends slowly. And we're seeing that bending taking place right now. What we want to see is behind the scenes diplomacy, which I'm sure is going on, I know is going on, where people are trying to find a diplomatic resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict and the Israeli-Arab wider conflict, a diplomatic solution that gives everybody their rights and ends the occupation, ends the fighting, ends the resistance, ends the boycotts and these things. So we have to be patient with this process, but the fact that it's developing is very, very significant.